Hi, everyone. This is Jeffrey Geisner for the Obligation of Memory podcast for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group on Facebook and YouTube. And we continue our terrific interview with Judith Tellerman, Dr. Tellerman from Chicago. Dr. Tellerman is a clinical psychologist, but also has just a beautiful talent about music. And we're bringing Judith's music, which is really stemming from her mother, into each one of these episodes. So welcome back, Judith. Glad to have you again. And this episode is really going to be devoted about you and growing up in your parents' home and you leaving the nest. So let's start. We know already that you have been moved from Brooklyn to a farm, a chicken farm in Flemington, New Jersey, which is quite a change. And we want to ask a little bit about how your parents struggled, if they struggled with their Holocaust memories, how they actually emanated, how did they come out from them, and did they affect you in ways that you may not have known then when you were growing up, but you can kind of go back today and say, I sound like my mom. I did this because my dad sounds like, I remember my dad doing this, and all of a sudden I wake up and I'm doing the same thing. So I'm going to lay those ideas out for you, and you will start at the chicken farm, and we'll start with how your parents handled their post-survivors, their post-Holocaust status.
Yeah. Well, coming to this chicken farm with the farm kids was quite a shock from Brooklyn, and my little beret and my little coat and all that stuff didn't go over so well with my briefcase, didn't go over so well with the farm kids. So we had to adjust. And it's interesting because when my mother did her testimony at the end of her tape, they asked her, okay, how did you adjust when you got to the States and you were on this farm? And she said, well, my daughter Judy in the first grade said to the teacher, why are you just talking about Christmas? Why don't you talk about Hanukkah? So the teacher invited me to come to the school and tell the kids about Hanukkah. And I was very concerned because I could hardly speak English very well, but I went and I did it.
How old were you?
I was 5.
Nice. Okay.
That's my mother's memory of how she adjusted. I didn't even know. And it's funny because I have friends now on Facebook that found me, that from elementary school, they found me. And one gal said, I'll never forget the description about Hanukkah in our elementary school and learning about Hanukkah and the dancing and the singing. And it was so wonderful. And that was from wherever I got I don't know where that came from a 5-year-old to say, why aren't you talking about Hanukkah? Whatever. So
then your parents, and we might have covered this earlier, but we'll do it again. Your parents talked to you about the Holocaust? And if they didn't, when did it switch? Obviously, later in life, earlier? Did you ask questions about the Holocaust?
It just would come out organically. I wouldn't go to my mother and start asking because she was I didn't want her to get a migraine. So I was very careful that if it just came out, things would come out about what we ate, what we did, different things. And one thing that my mother told me, she would say here and there, but one thing she said, like when her father was assassinated before she was born, so she never saw him or knew him. And she said to me once, my mother once told me that she had a dream. And in the dream, my father, that's my grandfather, was all wet. His face was wet. And she said, Davidel, why are you wet? And he said, because you're crying too much for me. It's too much. And so my mother just told me that. And just little things would come out.
All right, so you're a clinical psychologist. Now, the obvious question is, did all of this enter your DNA and push you to be the career that you have? And I'm going to come back to a couple more questions, but I'm going to jump right ahead because I want to first tell you and to fully disclose to the audience and to yourself. So I've suffered intergenerational trauma myself, but my parents never, ever spoke about the Holocaust, not a peep to myself or my sister. Even when my uncle which is my brother's younger brother, asked my mother late in life when he was ready to do his show and tape to tell him about Auschwitz, and she refused to tell even my father's brother. And that is on the tape, and he even speaks to that on the tape. My first recollection of my trauma was in the 5th grade. Now, you just told something about being 5. I was maybe 10, and the teacher separated the good boys from the good kids from the bad kids, and put the good kids on chairs up front, and the bad kids went in the back. And I was chosen, when I was a good kid, I thought, I was chosen to go in the bad kids' back of the room. And I refused to go to school. And the school was only 2 blocks away from where we lived. And I refused. I cried. My mom dragged me with my heels digging into the cement for the 2 blocks, went to the principal's office. And I have no idea why he did that. But you imagine the trauma that a teacher in the 5th grade would separate children according to good and bad. And that was the first recollection. And all throughout my life, and I'm a tech career guy, whenever my businesses would tip going south, I would wake up with the same horrific dream. I was in Nazi interrogated under hot lights in the Gestapo office, no beatings or anything, just this hot light. I was schwitzing, and I would wake up in the middle of the night, more than I can remember, having to take a shower because I was totally soaked. So I'm very interested in this discussion, and the only way I actually have been managing it is that in 2020, I met the 2nd generation San Diego group here in San Diego. And I thought for all my life I was going crazy, that no one else had these nightmares, these nightmares that I was having. And I couldn't understand why I was having these nightmares, because my parents never talked about it. And then I went to the group, and I found there was a group meetings, the social club. There were 50 second generations in attendance. I started to meet them. I learned that some of them spoke, some parents spoke about the Holocaust. Some parents never spoke. I learned that other people had stomach ailments, had headaches, migraines, woke up with stories like I'm telling. And so it really, knowing that I wasn't alone, put this in a perspective that I never had the rest of my life. And now I have a whole different management of this. I can go in, I can do my own interview stories here, but it's not about me. So I'm just giving you a setup to allow you some reflective time to sort of, as I'm talking, you think about how you got to where you have gotten. It's not, I don't think, by accident. And I'm wondering if you dial back, and now I'm going to let you not answer that question directly, but I want to go back and say, okay, when you left the home to go to college, what did your parents think about you leaving the house and to go to college?
Oh, well, they were happy for me. And when we got to Brandeis, which is where I went, which is this beautiful school on the mountain, and just, you know, with a castle in the middle, my mother got there and she said, I think I'm in heaven. She said, you're so fortunate to be able to do this and go here. And, you know,
how did you pay for it? Did your parents pay for it?
Well, it was a combination of things, but they helped. Yeah. And they did what they could. After all, I had 2 more sisters coming up that also went to Brandeis.
Oh,
so
really?
it was a big responsibility. Yeah.
Very Jewish school too.
Which no one had ever heard of in Flemington until I went there. And then everybody, you know, but it just was so serendipitous how I even heard about it.
What about your father's reaction? Was he on the trip with you?
Yeah, they came up with me and they were happy.
And he was happy? Did you feel pressured by your parents to be a good student?
Oh, all I ever heard was what's in your mind, they can't take away from you. Study, be a scholar, study, go to college. I think I told you in the last episode that they said we took your college, the money we were saving for your college to buy the farm. They were already saving the minute they got to the United States. They started saving for college for us. So, this is just, my mother was very big on, and she came from a very educated family.
Different for your siblings, or they each were pressured to be the same highest standards of achievement?
Yeah. I mean, my mother just said, study and do well. That's it. She didn't, it was very simple.
And your father was the same?
Yeah. Study. They were both.
Well, obviously, you all were very highly intelligent because you didn't give them any pushback, or they didn't have to come and ask you to study when you just were studying. So that wasn't the case really. So you went to Brandeis, you went to a 4-year school, and then you decided, when did you decide to, and what did you study at Brandeis? And then how did you turn the path into clinical psychology?
Yeah, I studied comparative literature and sociology. And then I I was working for a publishing company when I graduated, and then I went to Harvard to the Graduate School of Education to become a reading specialist, reading and learning disabilities. And while I was out in the field, I realized I didn't even know there was such a thing as a clinical psychologist. When I came to college, I never even heard about any of this stuff. From a small town, like, you don't really know much. And so I started meeting people. My friend who was a teacher, her husband was going to grad school in clinical psychology. And when I was graduating, one of the comp lit majors said to me, "Oh, I'm going to become a clinical psychologist because there aren't any jobs in comp lit. But when you have to be the best in the country to get anything. But when you're a clinical psychologist, you can have, it's okay." So I thought, oh, that must be nice. I didn't major in psych, so that's it for me. Well, when I was already out, and I realized I should be doing this. So I went back, I took undergrad classes while I was teaching during the day. And I was married at the time, and I took, my husband was a grad student, and I took classes after teaching, and I got my undergrad, statistics and research and all that. And then I hadn't taken any of it. And then I got my master's, and then I got my PhD in clinical,
So coming back to your parents, were your parents Orthodox, very religious, not religious?
Okay, there was one synagogue in our town, and it was conservative, and that's where we went. And we were very, very into it. Like, my mother was in the choir, and so was I. We went every week. It was our life. It revolved around the synagogue. And I sang, and the wife of the I'm trying to think of her name right now, I'm blocking. She was the wife of the dentist. She was our choir leader. And one of my friends from school is very good friends with her daughter. And it just was everything for us, singing the prayers and everything. Of course, I was in a lot of different events in school too. I was very active in school. I was in every club. I was in everything. I was a cheerleader. I was a star of the drama, the play, you name it, I was in it. So, but still, after school, after an activity, you went home. Like, the buses took everybody home. This was a rural area. So you didn't get together. You didn't play with anybody. You were on the farm. I was there with my sisters. That was it, and then I was in the clubs and the activities and did everything, and Latin club, and translated the Beatles songs into Latin and taught everybody the Beatles songs in Latin so we could sing them at the Latin banquet. And, I was really doing stuff. And I did get the most valuable student award in my high school for all my goings on that I was doing, writing editorials for the school newspaper and on and on and on. So I was very active. And
what customs do you remember your parents, the holiday customs, Shoshana, Yom Kippur, Pesach?
Everything. My mother did all the holidays. But the thing is that, it was based around the conservative synagogue. It wasn't we weren't from. So we did what we did. But, when you're on a farm, it's 24/7. You don't just stop and say it's Shabbos, it's not, it doesn't go like that. So, we did what we could, and we celebrated all the holidays, and my mother made the most wonderful gefilte fish, grinding everything. One time we had a fish in the bathtub. The fishermen came and they brought us a fish because they were fishermen, they knew that we were Jewish.
My wife tells a story about her grandmother, and one day she went to visit her grandmother's house near Pesach, and she went to go to the bathroom, and in the bathtub was a 7-foot carp that her grandmother had bought, and scared the living bejeebies out of her, and she ran out of the bathroom. She said, "There's something in the what's in the bathroom?" It's funny that you say that. So so tell me a little bit about your mom's cooking. How good a baker?
Oh God, she was unbelievable, and she learned in all her travels. She learned how to do high level Jewish cooking. So somewhere along the line, she was involved with a caterer. She was in everything. She worked in a matzah factory in Russia. She, you name it, she did it. But so she would make, yes.
Go ahead, finish what you're saying.
Made the most wonderful rugelach and everything, just everything. And she had a little shissel that with a hot, it's like a certain type of a chopper, and she would chop the fish by hand, everything by hand, and make the gefilte fish, make the chopped liver, make everything from scratch. And she even once tried to make noodles, but that was a lot. She made noodles from scratch. But she was always we had eggs because we had a chicken farm, so she could make all this stuff with eggs, kugel and latkes and you name it. And she did, everything was so elegant and so precise, and the perfect golden chicken soup with not one bit of fat floating, nothing floating, no, whatever that was called. She would take it off the top of the soup, and it was clear and beautiful with the matzo balls in it, and it had to be golden for her, for us.
Do you have memories of watching your mother in the kitchen?
Yes, I watched her, but we weren't allowed to do anything. Really? Just study. There
you go.
That's it.
That's the pressure.
We would be sitting in the kitchen studying, and she was doing everything. We weren't touching anything, just study.
So did your mother have formal recipes, or was it all out of her head?
Everything, it was out of her head, but the Chabad Rebbetzin in Chicago asked me for my mother's gefilte fish recipe. So my mother dictated it to me, and I gave it to the Rebbetzin. I had to make the way she made gefilte fish.
Well, it's funny that, my mom was a fabulous baker. She was from Košice, Czechoslovakia, and was deported to Auschwitz, and along with her whole family. And I grew up with my mom teaching me, or having my dad, who I told you went to Palestine. He was a woodworker, a master woodworker. So we never practiced it in the United States. They came to the United States in 1954, pregnant with my sister. And my dad made a chair ladder, so that on the front of the chair, there was a ladder so that I wouldn't fall forward or around to the side. So I was sort of like, it's a high chair, which was a regular chair, right? So my mom would bring the chair over whenever she was cooking. And I remember when I was between 5 and 12, I would stand on the chair and watch Mom bake. And if I was really good and patient, my mom would give me the mixer blades and the bowls to lick. But my mom had 200 recipes that she made. She's a fabulous cook, fabulous baker, always European, Hungarian, but she never had a recipe. So when you said about the narration, I'm going to tell you how our connections, these threads all come. And your father was in high fashion. Well, these threads are starting to knot up here. My sister, who's 4 years older than I am, my parents were in ill health in 2000, and my mom passed at 83 in 2011. So in 2008, my sister asked my mom to dictate her life story. And she took the dictation on a recorder, and then from there she transposed it onto the computer, and then in 2008 sent it to me. Except, if making a really long story short, which I started talking about, is that I was traumatized by the Holocaust. I never could open that file, ever. And
Okay.
I never read that file until 2019, when I came to San Diego. And the night after I went to that social function, I was so jazzed. I opened that file and read it
Oh,
for the very first time. And on my same thing from my father. And but what's interesting, during 1943 to 1946, there's no entries in that file. My mom did not give my sister any narration about her life during that period. So it went to her grave, that whole period of her life. Now, the thing that was also interesting, my sister wanted my mom's recipes. And so she asked my mom to dictate like 50 of the top Eva Geisner recipes. And then when I retired in 2016, Myra, my wife for 36 years, said, you can't just sit around, you got to do something. Why don't you bake your mom's dishes? And so I never baked before. And I bought a book called Baking for Dummies. And that's how I started to learn how to bake. And then I tried to bake my mom's easiest recipe. And I opened the scanned cards, and they were like a bissel of this, a little, and then you taste. Like, it was impossible to find my mom's recipe. So it's interesting that your mom at least could dictate the recipe. My mom could only do it instinctively, which is amazing. Now, I'll tell you another interesting story. Since I do the programming and I curate the programming for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group, I have curated 2 programs, about one on recipes in Auschwitz and another one on recipes in Terezin. And both parents were survivors of those concentration camps, and both had figured out ways to get paper. It's a tremendous story. There are 2 books. One is called Hidden Recipes, and the other one, the Terezin one, I can get you, but Eva Marimi wrote the one on Hidden Recipes, a Holocaust memoir, and Cara da Silva wrote about Terezin. And in both of those books, they talk about how the inmates spoke about recipes during the downtime at night, and talked about all the customs that they had from all over that area. And in both cases, somehow they got paper and pencil and wrote the recipes that those people were talking about. And I think my mother, who was so brilliant and such an entrepreneur and had such a great mind, that she was able to remember those mentions of those recipes her whole life. And she was 15 when she went into the camps. So that's a kind of little bit of a trade story there that we can share. So it's amazing how much these stories kind of connect with each other. So we're going to go back and say, okay, so there are many things that I remember my parents saying. And I'm going to ask you, I call these the triggers. And so my dad would always say, please shut the lights. We don't own money in the electric company, right? And my mom would always say, she always thought I was a peanut, like I was pencil thin, and she was always scared that I was going to die because I wasn't eating enough. And to the point where she took me to the doctor and gave the doctor instructions to give me sugar pills because I wasn't eating enough. And so I took sugar pills for like 3 years. And it was a whole game that the doctor and my mother, the doctor actually came from the same Koshitse as my mother did, and Dr. Katz, and they had this whole game. They were playing with each other over sugar pills. I've been taking sugar pills for 3 years because my mom was trying to get me to eat. And she was trying to do this, she knew it was a placebo, but she was trying to trick me into eating. So she used to always say, if you don't eat the food, I'm gonna send this food to China because there are Chinamen who would be dying for this food. So I wanna ask you, so if you recall your parents, this famous things that you can remember your parents saying, because everyone has them.
The thing that comes to mind is my father would say, either a mensch or a mess.
Okay.
You only have one choice.
And your mom?
I can't think of anything right now. Just that, because for her it was just be a scholar, don't be a show off, be a scholar. Don't be a show off. She didn't, and plus we were singing and but that's not the same as being a show off, when you are doing your, whatever it is, you're singing, it's something special that you do, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're showing off. That's a different category. So she would say that, make sure that you, and then, but she, she was always saying things. She's a very brilliant woman, but I can't remember like a specific phrase right now that would characterize, everything.
I think it's a great segment because we're bumping up against the second half hour, but I also want to give you the opportunity to again introduce another song to our audience and to explain why you've chosen the song. Okay,
now I have a few different ones from my mother, and since we're talking about like something, what does it mean? What's like difference between being a show off and being, having your talent and expressing it? This song was written by the Hazomir Chorale of Lodz. It's a yahrzeit song that my mother sang to me. And again, I don't know if it exists anywhere other than that my mother sang it to me and I recorded it. And it's an example of bringing great beauty and great talent that they did. It's written to Chopin's Death March. And it's that's the difference between just shallowness and art and beauty and trying to like do, what we're here on earth to make the world a better place, and we create. So we do that, whatever we create recipes, cooking, books, whatever we create, children, a plant that we plant, a tree. But that's what this song conveys, the beauty of that, as far as I'm concerned. Right. So I'm going to pick this one next, and it's the yahrzeit song. And it's a sad song, but it's very beautiful. Okay, so.
Can I ask you before you play it, when did your parents pass?
My father in 2008 and my mother in 2015.
How old were they?
And my father was almost 90. We just missed his 90th. And my mother was 92. And
before you go, when the last, let's say 5 years of their lives, what was memorable?
Well, my father, everyone loved him. He was just so lovable. And I don't know, I'm gonna get upset. I have to, it's just too hard now. He was sick. He was quite ill with his heart, and he didn't complain. And his doctor came to the Shiva. He came 25 miles to come to the Shiva to tell us that he never knew anyone like my father. He said, when your father, he suffered a great deal with his heart, with everything. And he said, he never complained. And when he was in the hospital, he went to other patients and to cheer them up. And he said, I never knew anyone like him. He came all the way to tell us that. And he said that he wrote us a letter and said, your father's untimely death, which he was almost 90, but to his doctor, it was untimely because he valued my father so highly.
And your mother?
And my mother, the last phone call that we had, she was asking me to send her the words to a song so she could learn it and sing it for one of the women at her assisted living center. So that was our last conversation of music, and for her to learn a song to sing, a Jewish song to sing. I was always sending her lyrics and tapes, and so she could learn new songs, and that was our community. She was still learning and still wanting to sing. And
I think that's a great setup for the yahrzeit song. So why don't we now hear from the art song.
So here it is.
Mit Weich und Schein, mit Weich und Schein, mit Weich und Schein, an eures Jahrzeit feiern und hellen sing, das stille Jeska-Lied, als süßer Schau zu unser einzige Befreien, du unser größter Mensch und größer Herr, du unser größter Mensch und größer Herr. Mit Weich und Schein, mit Weich und Schein, mit Weich und Schein, an eures Jahrzeit feiern und hellen sing, das stille Jeska-Lied, als süßer Schau zu unser einzige Befreien, du unser größter Mensch und größer Herr, du unser größter Mensch und größer Herr.
So I would like to give the English translation. With royal radiance begins the yahrzeit fire, and with light we sing this quiet Yisker song, a sweet sleep to our one most precious, to our great Mensch and great Jew. That's
Really special. So I think we are coming to the end of our second episode. We are going to start a third episode with Dr. Judith Tellerman. And I'm Jeffrey Geisner here for the Obligation of Memory podcast for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group on Facebook and YouTube. We're going to come back with a very interesting start of our third episode with Dr. Judith. So come on back. We'll see you soon.